Funding for the Maddy Report is made possible by grants from the California Emerging Technology Fund, leaders in the quest for digital equity. The James Irvine Foundation, committed to a California where all low-income workers have the power to advance economically. Fresno State Associated Students, Inc., students serving students. BNSF Railway, moving our economy for 160 years. And The Wonderful Company. The Maddy Report is also made possible thanks to contributions from Harris Ranch Inn and Restaurant and E&J Gallo Winery. From the Maddy Institute, the Public Policy Institute for the Valley's 4 public universities, this is the Maddy Report with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Keppler.
Welcome. Well, here's a basic policy question. Is there a need for government regulation, or should we simply let the market decide? And if regulation is necessary, has California gone too far? Is business overregulated? And what about lawsuits? Are they necessary to protect the public and consumers, or have we become overly litigious? Those questions have long been debated at the state capitol by strong advocates on both sides. Today, our guest is one of those advocates, Jennifer Barrera. She is the CEO and president of the California Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to the Maddy Report.
Thank you so much for having me.
So before we get started, I just wanted to ask you, your website describes the chamber as, quote, helping businesses do business in California, unquote. So in a nutshell, what do you do?
There's really 2 parts to that. We advocate for businesses at the state capitol and in the regulatory agencies. And then we have a compliance side that helps businesses comply with some of our complex labor and employment laws that are unique to California.
Okay, so let's get into it. So let's talk about government regulations. So that's the initial question that I asked. Is some regulation necessary, or can we just rely on the market to handle things?
Yeah, I think there is some basic regulations that are necessary in the market, and to make sure that everybody's kind of playing by the same rules and in the same boundaries. But I do believe that California is overregulated in many areas, and there needs to be some reforms.
Okay, so we're going to assume that some regulation is necessary. Of course, the debate is, well, how much? Where's that line? Is there a better way to regulate? I mean, we've talked about this in the past about, California, most regulatory laws kind of punishing you doing for something wrong as opposed to incentivizing you for doing something right. Do we have that balance off?
Yeah, I would say we do. That has been basically the nature of the culture, is to impose or propose these mandates on business with a hammer of some type of enforcement or penalty or some type of monetary damage on the other end if businesses don't do that. And it is a really huge problem for businesses in California. Examples that we can provide where they've just been hit with lawsuits for leverage to enforce things. And it is a huge cost to doing business in California, and really one of the drivers that makes it so complicated to do business here.
So let me ask you, there are all kinds of suggestions about statutory and regulatory reforms that are out there. I'm wondering, which does the chamber support?
Well, one of the biggest regulatory or statutory reforms that we support and are really pushing for right now is dealing with the Labor Code Private Attorneys General Act that's been in place since 2004. And
briefly describe what that is for folks.
Yeah, PAGA, as it's commonly utilized in normal conversation, is a California unique law that basically says any employee can file a lawsuit, a representative lawsuit, on behalf of themselves and any other aggrieved employee for basically any violation of our labor code, which is over 1,000 pages long. The only exception to that is dealing with workers' compensation. And PAGA also says that if the underlying labor code that you're suing on does not have a penalty associated with it, PAGA will provide one for you. And the penalty that PAGA provides is $100 per employee for the first pay period, $200 per employee for every pay period thereafter, and then a right to automatic attorney's fees. So it gets very costly, very quick for businesses.
And what it really deals, a lot of this deals with wage and hour cases. And the wage and hour laws are very complicated. There's a lot of them, and it's frankly very easy for an employer to trip up. And then these kinds of penalties attached. I want to ask you though about some other stuff like a sunset provision on laws. I mean, the argument against that as well, the legislature is dealing with all these laws that they got to add onto their plate or view of existing laws. They're just going to be overwhelmed. That's one idea. The other idea is cost-benefit analysis on regulations, whether it be prospectively or retrospectively. The argument there is, well, you really can't quantify benefits. I mean, what are your thoughts on those reforms?
I mean, I think both of those reforms make sense. Look, we have legislatures, the legislators who have extended terms now from what they had before. They're here for 12 years. And I think it's totally appropriate for the legislature to be able to review some of the laws that they've passed to see whether or not they're working as intended. We've seen that with regards to even tax credits that have an automatic sunset because the legislature wants to be able to review whether or not those tax credits are working. And so in the reverse, they should be able to do that with other policies as well. With regards to kind of an economic analysis of what some of these proposals or mandates cost would be a huge benefit as far as transparency to really evaluate what we're asking our business community to do. There are some economic analyses that are done on really big regulations, but there's no comprehensive analysis for any policy area of all the different requirements that businesses are being asked to comply with and what those costs are.
Yeah, and I actually have spoken to someone at the non-partisan legislative analyst office. They did a report on this a little while ago, and I followed up with them. I said, anything happen with your recommendations on how these agencies can do better, or legislature can do better cost-benefit analysis? He goes, no, not really. So he said, that's still something that needs to be addressed. But up next, we're going to talk about the Chamber of Commerce's list. It's called a job killer list. Despite a Democratic governor and supermajorities of Democrats in both houses of the legislature, if the California Chambers put something on that job killers list, it's usually DOA. We're going to talk about that in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking with Jennifer Barrera. She's the president and CEO of the California Chamber of Commerce. You know, each year the Chamber puts out a list, it's called the Job Killer Bills list. And the Chamber has a track record of success in those bills that have never becoming law. It's kind of impressive. I went back and took a look. We looked at your website and looked at the bills, tracked them over the last 10 years. You've got a 94% success rate over the last 10 years. It's remarkable. Only 15 of the 258 ones you came out against actually made it into law. So that's a heck of a record, particularly when you consider you have a Democratic legislature, you have supermajorities of Democrats in both houses of the legislature. That's just a remarkable record. So inquiring minds want to know, how in the world do you do this?
It's a great question. And I think goes to the selectiveness of what's on the job killer list. We are very selective as to which bills actually qualify as a job killer. We have an amazing advocacy team that really goes out and educates the legislature on the impacts of the legislation once it's on the job killer list. So it's a combination of different factors. But just for context, I mean, there's over, approximately 3,000 bills that are introduced every legislative cycle. And every year we only put maybe 20 to 25 of those bills on the job killer list. So it really does highlight how selective we are with regards to those bills.
Well, it kind of begs the question. So what's on this year's list?
There's different categories of policies that are on the list this year. Labor and employment mandates are always a significant topic on our job killer list, just because it really is such a huge and direct cost to our employers and businesses in the state who are trying to create those jobs. There's several bills on our job killer list this year in that legislative policy area that either increased litigation in the labor and employment arena, whether it's under the Fair Employment and Housing Act or under POG, as we just talked about. There's also bills that are in the environmental space that really expedite some of our climate goals that we're already having a challenge meeting right now. And so expediting those goals would put a tremendous amount of pressure on the business community, not to mention costs. There's some bills in the housing industry that would actually interfere with our ability to build more housing for our workforce, which of course is a challenge for employers attracting workforce to California. And then there's some in the tax arena. We are not big fans of any tax increases to our business community. And so those are, of course, almost automatics on our job killer list when those are introduced.
Yeah. So I want to kind of switch gears a little bit and talk about, the fact that, the Democrats control state government for all intents and purposes. So Republicans or conservatives or business, and then sometimes labor too actually uses the initiative and the initiative process. Business tends to sometimes use the referendum process to kind of get their policies advanced. And so one of the complaints about the referendum process is if you get enough people to sign up to put up something on as a referendum, it puts the legislation on pause. And one of the examples was with vaping. There was a vaping law where they spent all this money to get it on the ballot, like $20 million. But then when it came to actually get it passed, they spent $2 million. And they said, well, why would they do that? And they found that, the vaping companies made $1.1 billion during that 2-year hiatus. And so they're saying, this is the distortion of the process. The same thing, to be fair, labor unions use the initiative process just like companies do. I mean, what do you think about that direct democracy in California? Have we gone a little too far that way? Not far enough?
Yeah, I think, making a distinction between the referendum process and the initiative process. First, I'll start off with the referendum process. It is an opportunity for the direct democracy, for voters to really have a say in what policies are being passed in our state. The allegation that there has been abuse in the referendum process is just not borne out by the data. Over the last 100 years, there's only been 33 laws that have been subject to a referendum. And as I mentioned earlier, just this year, there was approximately 3,000 laws that were introduced into the legislature. So not a high reflection of any type of abuse. In the last 10 years, there's only been 5 laws that have been subject to referendum. And then even though it's subject to referendum, again, it's still the voters who ultimately get to decide whether or not the law goes into effect. And there's about a close to a 50-50 split with regards to those that have qualified and the number of times that the voters have struck down the law or the voters have approved it. So again, not really a high reflection of an abuse on that side of things, as has been alleged. On the initiative side, you have seen a lot of activity in the initiative side. And again, it's from labor organizations and from business organizations as well. I think that is a reflection of frustration on the ability to really get policy done in the legislature. So they have to turn to the ballot process, or it's an attempt to get some type of leverage so that it forces a legislative discussion on a particular policy.
It's kind of a breakdown of the legislative process. We sometimes see this. We only got about 30 seconds left, but I did want to ask this one last question in this segment, and that is, I've noted that the Chamber recently signed what's called an equal pay pledge. And what is the pledge, and why did the Chamber feel it was necessary to sign it?
Yeah, the Equal Pay Pledge is something that is being promoted by the First Partner of California, the California Women's Legislative Caucus, and the California Commission on the Status of Women and Girls to really encourage employers to commit to best pay practices to achieve equal pay. It's something that Cal Chamber was supportive of in 2014 when the legislation was actually passed to strengthen California's equal pay law. It's something that's near and dear, of course, to my heart, but it really is a benefit to employers to embrace those practices, to make sure that their compensation practices don't have any unknown or underlying bias or discrimination of any kind with regards to how they compensate. So we were proud to take that pledge and are proud to be engaged on that effort.
Okay, well, thanks for that. Well, up next, we're going to talk about litigation. Are we overly litigious here in California? That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking with Jennifer Barrera. She's the president and CEO of the California Chamber of Commerce. Let's turn our attention to lawsuits. One of the most frequent and contentious, particularly in light of California's housing challenges, is CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act. People have been talking about some of the shortcomings in CEQA for a while. No one's really opposed to the intent, but kind of maybe the way it's been implemented has been somewhat problematic. Greenmail, for example, kind of using it to threaten people to stop projects has been an issue. Any chance that that's going to be subject to some kind of reform or amendments in the near future?
Well, I certainly hope so. I mean, I think part of our housing challenges and our housing supply is certainly directly related to CEQA and the litigation that goes on around that. The governor said earlier this year that it was something that he thought needed to be reformed specific to housing. We also know that with a lot of our clean energy projects, those are being delayed or held up because of CEQA litigation. And so again, as you said, Mark, we're not opposed to being sensitive and reviewing projects with respect to the environment, but the existing framework has certainly led to too many delays and too much litigation.
One of the things we see, in law, and I know you have a legal background, so do I, is this thing called nuisance suits. These suits that are filed not really for the merit of the claim, but rather because the cost of defending the claim is just worth it to settle it out for some amount. In the long run, this is a better way to handle it. But how do you square, the fact that you don't want to see real necessarily nuisance suits, but you also want to give people the right to file claims that they feel they've really been aggrieved? How do you square that circle?
Yeah, I think what ultimately ends up happening with a lot of the nuisance suits is the attorney's fee provision that drives a lot of those. And that's something that I saw in practice. As long as you have an automatic right to attorney's fees, if you recover even a nominal amount, it really does drive this litigation for any type of claim. Where there is a balance with regards to attorney's fees where either party can recover if they're the prevailing party, I think it really does weed out some of those nuisance lawsuits, but still gives an opportunity for a day in court. And there's other processes in place through our administrative agencies, such as the Labor Commissioner's Office, where you can have a claim handled without the need for an attorney and an efficient and effective process. We're not about denying anybody their right to court or their ability to go and get redressed for their grievances. The concern is, again, what is driving the litigation sometimes is the attorney's fees instead of the actual harm.
And attorney's fees can be substantial. I mean, people think, oh, $5,000, $10,000. No, it can be a lot more. 50, 60, 70, 100, it can be a lot. And that sometimes drives some of these cases. I want to ask you, you talk about the labor commissioner. There have been at least historically complaints about getting cases processed in a timely manner. And so, one thing I'm thinking about, if you think about the courts in litigation, there's also kind of the same complaint that it's kind of grinding to a halt. It makes me think of two things. It makes me think of the idea that, well, justice delayed is justice denied, and time is money. And so I'm wondering, would it make some sense for the state to spend a little more money and provide more resources to courts to move, so it allows them to move cases forward more expeditiously?
Yes, I mean, we've always been supportive of the state court system and making sure there was funding. There was a lot of budgetary issues during the Brown administration with regards to the courts, and we were supportive of restoring some funding to them to make sure that these claims were resolved. It does not benefit the businesses to actually have these claims just holding out there without any resolution, and so that's something that we actually have been supportive of with our friends at the trial attorneys to make sure that the courts can effectively work and resolve these in an effective manner.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. The delays can sometimes be substantial. And by the way, that's a cost to both sides, right?
Yes.
The plaintiff wants the case resolved. The employer, they got the case there. They're still dealing with it. It's still something in the background that's just another issue. And I think everybody would benefit if things move forward. And speaking of which, we've only got a minute left in this segment, but I want to ask you about alternative dispute resolution. There's different kinds. There's binding arbitration. There's some disagreement about whether the people like that. But there's also mediation. And to full disclosure, I do a lot of work in both arbitration and mediation. I do find an uptick in mediation. People seem to think, both sides seem to like it. But is there any negative for employers? Sometimes they think that, well, if I agree to mediation, somehow I'm admitting that I did something wrong. Is that a hurdle at all?
No, in fact, a lot of our employers, a lot of our businesses are very supportive of mandatory mediation. You have to have both parties engaged. You have both parties need to be participating. And it's actually something we advocated for as a part of legislation that was passed dealing with the expansion of family leave to small employers, to have them participate in a mandatory mediation program with the department so that you avoid the cost of litigation and you can actually come to an early resolution.
Yeah, I do it. I'm a big believer in mediation and that process. Well, up next, I'm just wondering, is there reason to be optimistic that maybe things are changing in terms of the political climate in Sacramento? That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking with Jennifer Barrera. She's the president and CEO of the California Chamber of Commerce. It's been noted that you were part of changing the guard of the highest levels of California's most powerful political institutions. For example, both you at the Chamber of Commerce and the lead now at the California Federation of Labor that represents labor, until recently were both led by men. Now they're both led by women. So I'm just wondering, does that portend a new era in California politics or in state politics? Or am I reading too much into this?
It is interesting how many kind of heads of different associations and trade organizations have changed over in the last few years. And I think it absolutely will change how politics are done to some extent. My mentor, Alan Zarenberg, who was here for many years, had a perspective. I have a similar perspective, but I'm sure I'll do things in a different way. I am assuring that it's the same with Lorena Gonzalez over at the Labor Federation, that she has a different perspective than her predecessor. So I think naturally it's going to change the way in which things are done, but how it is changing and what that looks like, I couldn't tell you yet.
Yeah, well, you mentioned Alan Zarenberg. He was the former Chamber president and CEO. I had met him in the past, a very nice gentleman. He was known for building diverse coalitions with like-minded business interests and often cross-party lines, frankly, to get things done, to find solutions and compromise. I was struck. Unfortunately, he had retired, and shortly thereafter, he had an untimely passing, and it really affected a lot of people at the state capitol. And I was struck by the remembrances that people had of him, and I just want to read a few of those for you. Robbie Hunter, who is the retired leader of the State Building and Construction Trades Council of California, a true labor leader, said, quote, "He was a genuine person that did care about working people," unquote. Anna Monsantos, who is a Democrat, advisor to several governors, Gavin Newsom, Jerry Brown, Arnold Schwarzenegger, she considered him a mentor. And Governor Newsom said, quote, "A fair and decent man to his core, Alan always strived to build relationships and build across the board an increasingly rare feat." Is there something maybe we can all learn by the way Alan Zarenberg approached politics?
Yeah, absolutely. He was certainly, I would say, one of a kind. a huge mentor to me, but his approach to things is something that I think is instructive. And another, thing that I will try to mirror in my leadership here at Cal Chamber. He really put a ton of time and effort into developing relationships, making sure that he was a trusted resource for people, that he was credible. And I think those relationships and the effort he put into it is really reflective of how successful he was, and able to get things done. And the comments that you heard from the diversity of the different groups and their backgrounds, I think really reflects, again, his ability to make those connections in the different groups and to ultimately build those coalitions.
You used to call it the golden age of California politics. It was a day when Senator Maddy, or our institute's named after, and Willie Brown, the self-described Ayatollah of the Assembly, strong Democratic leader, got things done. They cut deals. People, I think, because we've been in this politically polarized environment for so long, forget that back in the 1990s and earlier, things were getting done. People were crossing the aisle and finding solutions. And certainly one of the things we do at the Maddy Institute is really support that idea of working out these problems together. Now, I want to end with one last question. We've got a minute left. I want to ask you about this. It's kind of difficult because the states kind of have to address kind of two issues at once. You've got this negative perception about California in the eyes of some business leaders, but you've also got, what Governor Jerry Brown once referred to as California's two-tier economy. How do you create public policy that really meets, addresses both of those concerns?
I think it's really what you just said and what we kind of talked about over this episode. It is finding the ability to reach across the aisle, to reach across those different parties and find common ground solutions. Too many times we see these mandates being proposed that I would argue don't really take into consideration a lot of the business concerns or interests. And so being willing to have those discussions and craft policy on a more moderate ground approach will really kind of change the narrative of the business climate here in California, but it will also address kind of our economic challenges that we have. And so really finding that moderate ground and having those discussions is what we need to do.
I want to thank Jennifer Barrera, the Chamber CEO and President, for joining us. Really appreciate for being here. If you want to stay current with state and local politics, you can sign up for our free e-newsletter, the Maddy Daily, by logging on to our website at maddyinstitute.com. This is Mark Keppler for the Maddy Institute. Thanks for joining us.
The views expressed in the Maddy Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Maddy Institute. If you'd like to share your thoughts about today's episode of the Maddy Report, please visit our website at maddyinstitute.org.